President Trump's policy towards China keeps getting tougher as the world's two biggest economies face off, not just over trade, but also military and political issues. Earlier, I sat down with China's ambassador to the U.S.,崔天凯, to discuss the state of relations between our two countries. Ambassador Cui, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you.
I want to start with Vice President Pence's tough comments about China last week. Here he is.
When it comes to Beijing's malign influence and interference in American politics and policy, we will continue to expose it, no matter the form it takes.
The Vice President called out what he says is your economic aggression, what he called your emboldened military, and what he alleges are your efforts to interfere in the U.S. midterm election. Are the U.S. and China now engaged in a new Cold War?
Well, first of all, I have to say all these accusations are groundless. One of the fundamental principles in China's foreign policy is non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. And we have been consistent in this position. We have a very good track record.
You were part of a quite tough meeting with Secretary of State Pompeo in Beijing this week, in which top Chinese officials said that they would take, quote, all necessary measures to safeguard your country. How far is China prepared to go in terms of standing up to the U.S.?
I think it's the legitimate right of every country to defend its national interests, and China is no exception. But the talks Secretary Pompeo had in Beijing was a very good communication at such a high level between the two sides, and it's very timely.
Let's unpack some of this, and let's start with the allegation of election meddling. Vice President Pence says that China is specifically targeting tariffs to hurt Republican voters, to try to turn them away from voting for Republican candidates and eventually from voting for President Trump in 2020. He says that you are putting propaganda mailers in U.S. newspapers, and this week the FBI director said that China is now the number one, the greatest counterintelligence threat that the U.S. faces. Are you engaged in trying to meddle in the election in 2018 the way the Russians did in 2016?
You see, Chinese media, they are just learning from American media to use all these means to buy commercial pages from newspapers to make their views known or to cover what is happening here. This is normal practice for all the media.
I want to turn to the trade war. President Trump has imposed tariffs on $250 billion of Chinese goods. Your country has responded with tariffs on $110 billion of U.S. exports. Here is President Trump on the situation.
We have tremendous potential to grow incredibly when we get rid of these horrible, disgusting trade deals with China. Over the last 5-6 years, we've been losing $300 to $500 billion a year. Billion!
Now, I know you say that the U.S. started it, but at this point, whoever started it, are the U.S. and China engaged in a trade war?
Well, we don't want to have any trade war with any other country, including the United States. But the fact is, through the bilateral trade between China and the United States, you know how much benefit American consumers have got over the years, and how much money American companies have made from their operation in China. You have to look at the whole picture. It's important to notice who started this trade war. We never want to have a trade war, but if somebody started a trade war against us, we have to respond and defend our own interests.
U.S. officials say, though, that China is not so innocent in all of this. They say that you steal intellectual property, that you force technology transfers from U.S. companies that invest in China to Chinese companies. And here is Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro talking about China.
Structurally, it's geared toward being sort of the parasite of the world. Everything that it does to grow its economy often comes at the expense of everybody else.
Right. And just this week, a top Chinese intelligence officer was extradited back to the U.S. for allegedly trying to steal secrets from GE Aviation and other aerospace companies.
I think all these accusations about how China has developed are groundless and not fair to the Chinese people. You see, China has 1.4 billion people. It would be hard to imagine that 1/5 of the global population could develop and prosper not by relying mainly on their own efforts, but by stealing or forcing some transfer of technology from others. That's impossible. The Chinese people are as hardworking and diligent as anybody on earth.
Are you clear who President Trump listens to on trade issues, whether it's moderates like Kudlow and Mnuchin or hardliners like Navarro?
You tell me.
You have confusion about this? I mean, that's obviously part of your job as the Chinese ambassador, to be able to report back to Beijing who has the president's ear.
Honestly, I've been talking to ambassadors of other countries in Washington, D.C., and this is also part of their problem.
What?
They don't know who is the final decision maker. Of course, presumably, the president will take the final decision. But who is playing what role? Sometimes it could be very confusing.
There are also military tensions. A Chinese warship recently harassed a U.S. ship exercising freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, and the U.S. is close to approving a $330 million arms sale to Taiwan. Do you view the U.S. ships in the South China Sea, sales to Taiwan, do you view those as U.S. provocations?
First of all, I think we have to be clear what the incident took place. You were right to say it was in South China Sea. So it's at China's doorstep. It's not Chinese warships that are going to the coast of California or to the Gulf of Mexico. It's so close to the Chinese islands and so close to the Chinese coast. So who is on the offensive? Who is on the defensive? This is very clear. About American arms sale to Taiwan, this is a very good example of American intervention into Chinese internal affairs.
Let's talk about another flashpoint, North Korea. Does China agree with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that any steps that he takes towards denuclearization must be matched by U.S. concessions on the other side? And how do you respond to allegations, even by President Trump, that China has relaxed its sanctions against North Korea and is allowing goods to flow into North Korea?
China has voted in favor of all the UN Security Council resolutions about sanctions against DPRK. And we are implementing all these resolutions.
You have not relaxed them?
As long as these resolutions are still in force, we will implement them faithfully.
And do you think that the United States is right, that denuclearization has to happen first, or do you agree with Kim that North Korea takes a step, the U.S. takes a step?
I think in order to achieve our goal, we have to have a coordinated, phased and step-by-step approach.
That's the Kim position.
Well, this is the reality. How can you convince him to give up all the nuclear weapons without any hope that the U.S. would be following a more friendly policy towards him?
Finally, President Xi and President Trump will meet in Buenos Aires at the G20 summit next month in November. What do you think are the possibilities that they can turn the situation around, make it less tense?
You see, I was very honored to be present at the meetings between the two presidents, both at Mar-a-Lago April last year and in Beijing last November. And it was so clear that such top-level communication played a key role, irreplaceable role, in guiding the relationship forward. And there is a good mutual understanding and good working relationship between the two. I hope and I'm sure this will continue.
Ambassador Sway, thank you so much. Please come back, sir.